Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Lessons Learned from Thinkers 50 Certain Uncertainty. Today, we're taking a deeper dive into the idea of supply chain disruption as we dig into today's topic of focus lessons learned from leading yourself and your company from a position of future oriented growth. And when we really look at what has happened over the past few years, there's been massive swings in demand, right? We had record-setting container rates, we had record-setting trucking rates, and it doesn't really stop. Even this year, we've seen many things happen. We saw Yellow go bankrupt. We saw an extended UAW, the United Auto Workers strike. We just got past the writer strike in Hollywood. And while these different things may not necessarily seem like true supply chain disruptions, they do have a resounding impact on the industry. And it doesn't seem to be stopping. At the same time, there are companies, Kevin, you know this, there are companies out there right now that are walling off expenses, implementing hiring freezes in anticipation of potential economy or economic issues. And even at Jason's Creations Inc., we've had to have conversations around this, like, what is the right thing for us to do? Do we continue with a growth oriented mindset, or do we prepare for the worst?
Yeah.
And it's easy for us to look at the lessons of the past and say, let's batten down the hatches, let's get everything in order, and let's do what we know. Well, that doesn't really work in the supply chain, and it doesn't really work in our business because we must lead from a position of future growth. And that's the solution to overcoming supply chain disruption. We've seen it time and again where companies have indeed taken steps to prepare for future growth despite uncertainty. And that is the core issue that we discussed today. What was his name? Terrence Maury, or Mari. I don't know how to say the last name, so forgive me. But his chapter in the book is all about leading from the future, not the past. So, with that being said, Kevin, would you like to kind of start us off with some of the core takeaways from this chapter?
Yeah. So the main things that I saw, just a couple highlights, and then we can really dive into it. How do we enable wise choices, not just the fastest? That is so good. Because like you were saying, especially with supply chain disruptions, it is so tempting to make those really fast decisions, but then you ruin your future growth.
Yeah.
And that's just huge. So that's something that we're doing right now. We're walking this line at Jason's Creations of how do we be the company that we want to be while still sitting in the reality of where we are right now.
Yes.
There's certain things that we would love to do that we just can't, but we need to still be holding on to that future idea of who we want to be and who we are and figuring out how do we get there.
Definitely. I like the idea that when you kind of point it that way. And Terrence goes on to say, as leaders respond to remote and hybrid work models, humans and machines, workforce ecosystems, and talent marketplaces, embedding future focused leadership is the best way to say goodbye to the status quo. We have to make a knowing trust leap into the future. And we can actually turn those risk into a tailwind for growth. It can feel a bit redundant, and you know what? It's scary. Um, what happened this week, Kevin, with one of the major carriers?
Oh yeah, their TMS went down.
Estes Express.
Oh boy.
Estes Express, major company. They won the stalking horse bid for Yellow's contracts,
Yeah.
and now they're having problems. So
That's
It is
wild.
an endless cycle of disruption, no matter where you go. And Craig Fuller from FreightWaves, along with
Yeah.
Zach Strickland, had an article out in the last week where they were talking about if you look strictly at the data, you would say, this is an amazingly strong recovery.
Yeah.
But then when you visit with some companies, it's like, we ran a hiring freeze. We're not accepting loads for this region, or we're not sending drivers to this region. We're preparing for the worst.
Yeah.
And preparing for the worst is great in a lot of different scenarios, right?
Yeah.
It is not great when you want your business to succeed and you to just have disruption after disruption after disruption.
Yeah. And let me add to that. It's so difficult to parse through all of this information and make strong choices, because there's some people who are like, well, just look at the data, right? The data says this is a strong recovery. Okay. But then you look at like boots on the ground and things are hard for a lot of people.
Yes.
And we have, like, for a lack of better term, just PTSD from all these catastrophic events, right? But they said down here in the section, the wisdom gap, data isn't the new oil, wisdom is the new oil. And that's so valuable. It's not just about data, but what we can do as leaders to parse through that data, to see boots on the ground, and there's some sort of middle ground. And it's using your own wisdom and confidence as a leader to navigate that. Like, yes, we do need to be looking at the data. The data looks good. Cool. But we can't ignore the realities of what's happening right in front of us as well.
Yes.
You have to navigate that.
And it's ironic when you talk about that, because you think, well, if we protect things, our employees are going to want to stay. We're going to be able to retain talent because we're going to still be open.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that research by Hack Future Lab found that a lack of internal growth opportunities is a core reason employees quit. And at the same time, 79% of workers do not think their current employer offers long-term growth-led opportunities.
Yeah.
We were having a conversation about this last night, about implementing an additional training program for our team. Because if we do not grow, if we do not plan for growth, we will be outgrown by our competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the truth of it. We have to look at career agility. We have to look for ways to increase autonomy over these traditional set rules. Don't batten down the hatches just yet.
Yeah.
And you have to operate at the edge of uncertainty, because you know what? It's just going to happen again. Even if you do everything right and you save every dollar you can into the business, something is coming.
Yeah.
And, it just is the reality of it. And the sooner you recognize that and you start leading from that point of, this is what's going to happen, you're going to be able to deal with things a lot more efficiently. When you mentioned that about data being the new, data not being the new oil, okay, so we all know we're doing EOS, and EOS is a very data-rich process. But in addition to that, it's a very realistic process. You have to simplify things in order to be success. And how do you simplify things? Through wisdom-based choices. Is it wise to reduce spend when you face some economic instability? To a degree. But you know what's worse? So you're like, okay, well, we have this risk on the horizon. But what is worse than battening it down? Well, pretending like that risk isn't going to happen, or pretending like another risk isn't going to happen. The book, Terrence, he mentioned the number of words in the U.S. tax code increased from 400,000 to 4 million in the last 20 years. I don't know about you. I've written a couple million words, like 10 or so million, but I don't remember all of that. And I'm the one who wrote it, so I sure don't want to be the one looking at all of it. But we have companies that are basing their entire cultures on a high risk tolerance for experimentation. They're reframing the idea of failure as a platform that can welcome ideas to improve the status quo. And you have to have a safe communication standard with your employees. They have to know that it's safe to provide feedback. They have to know it's safe to provide ideas. They have to know it's safe to think we don't always have all of the answers.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're saying that, because in the section in Futures We Grow, in that first paragraph, they talk about conformity-based or conformity-focused leadership versus future-focused leadership. And they call conformity-focused fake empowerment.
Yeah.
We're actively looking to find ways to empower people in our organization into more leadership positions, because we want to diversify all of that. So we know we're trying to do that, but I've been a part of companies, more companies than not, by the way, that say they value diversity and they want to empower their people, but it was all fake. It was all this fake empowerment because of weak leadership. And that's might be a little mean to say, but it was 100% true. They did not really care what anyone thought. They wanted everyone to just conform to what we've decided and keep your opinions to yourselves, even though there was thousands of people that had great ideas. They didn't listen to any of it. And it was just this fake empowerment. It was silence over speaking up, fear over freedom, and fake empowerment over active decision making.
Yeah, and you know, leaders, we can't look at it as we have all of the answers, right?
Yeah.
It's similar to the conversation we had yesterday where I was like, I would love, we were talking a bit about our accountability chart and what we are planning and how we are able to really position ourselves to grow. And we encountered a problem where it seemed like even though I had wanted to empower you to do something, we were having problems just from a skill set point of view.
Yeah.
And we had to kind of think, okay, what is the right way for us to do this until you have that right skill set? And that skill set will come and it will get easier with time. But in the meantime, it is important to make sure that when you empower someone, you do give them the tools and resources they need to succeed. And for us, we decided that means rather than, for example, me providing feedback to a specific employee, it's best for me to relay that feedback to that person's supervisor, which is you. So you can position that feedback to best help that person. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, okay, we all know me, right? There are times where I am not the best person at giving feedback because I'm like, yes, no, yes. Okay, bye. And that just doesn't work. So we have to be careful with what we say. We have to have clarity to focus. And in that point, in that question, in that section we're talking about, you have to have the courage to unlearn.
Yeah.
You have to recognize that the way you've always done it may not work in the future.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how successful you are.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter if you just, succeeded in winning the bid to take over what was left of Yellow. Something will go wrong.
Yeah.
And you have to really look at it from that view, and you have to be willing to unlearn what you know. In search engine optimization, we see this all the time, right? We see where you're like, okay, this is what has usually worked. And then Google rolls out its core update and they're like, AI-generated content is bad. Then we have an update, AI-generated content is good if you fix it. Then we have an update from them that's like, we're improving our generative AI experience for content written with Bard. So it can kind of be like, improvement whiplash, like
it was bad until they had their own. It was bad. They didn't like it until they had their own AI up and running, and now they want people to use it.
Exactly. And that's where you kind of get into delving a little bit further, which is unlearning is a form of future readiness. It is an accelerant for future focused leadership. And Hack Future Labs mentioned that while 70% of workers believe their voice doesn't matter at work, those that do, there's an underlying story of that. That means that up to about a third of all workers do believe they have an opinion that can be taken seriously. But unless companies take those active steps, you end up with situations where we have hiring freezes, where we have companies backing off, where we have companies being hesitant to invest in marketing or search engine optimization or market expansion or whatever the case may be, because you have to worry and be concerned about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
If less than 20% of your work consists of things you love to do, you are more than 6.7 times likely to suffer burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you, I have been there. It is not a fun position.
Yeah.
But one of the things that can help against burnout is putting your opinions forward, coming up with ideas, saying, look, this isn't working, this is what I think, and then but when those opinions fall into affairs, you have a problem.
Yeah. And that looks like a good segue into that graphic that Hack Future Labs did. I've been staring at
exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, I've been staring at it. It's so good. And man, it just reminds me of everything that we've been doing these past couple months of knowing who we are. You have to know your identity. You got to know how we work, and then knowing how you grow, and that scale for long-term value and rethink human capacity stacks around talent to value creation. That's exactly what we were talking about yesterday, just yesterday, of like, should we bring in a person to do this one task, or is there a tool that we can use to scale? And at some point we're going to need a person to take that on. But right now, the long-term value is to just create a tool that would do that. And rethinking human capability stacks. That's with long-term value. That's good.
Exactly. I remember us doing an article way back in the day, probably 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. And it talked about the current economy not being your grandfather's economy. Now, I'm not going to say the name of the company or what we're doing, but I think you remember the article.
Yeah.
And my whole point in there was technology comes, and there is a perception that technology erases an employee.
Yeah.
It's not true.
No.
Because then you have that technology that needs to be managed and guided. And now, it's AIs. Now, in next year, gosh only knows what could happen.
Yeah, it says right here that next part for point 3, leverage AI-powered talent marketplaces to break down silos and increase internal growth. That's how we grow. We have to use talent with tools.
Yes.
It's both together.
Yes, you can't have one or the other. And that was the way my family always described it was a come to Jesus moment, because I wanted to say we don't want to look at AI through the lens of, can we use it for different capabilities beyond improvement? But if we don't, we're going to get passed. We're going to get passed by others. And we do have the advantage that the day ChatGPT came out, I had a full-on panic attack and proceeded to say, let's figure out what we can do with this. It's going to take a long time, but we'll figure it out. And now here we are, 11 months down the line, understanding more about how we could apply it for an improvement purposes, improving our SEO. Doesn't necessarily mean we're writing things with it. Doesn't necessarily mean we're not using it, but we are applying it for improvement purposes. Even when in what someone might consider creating content, we have initial content, but then maybe we tweak it, or maybe we need to use an AI to tweak it because what we are typing is not making sense. So
I personally love doing my own first draft and then asking ChatGPT to give me their version. And I read their version. I look at my version. I'm like, well, that's good, but I don't like that. And so maybe I'll just incorporate some of that into what I did. It brings up points that maybe I hadn't thought of.
Exactly. And that is one thing that, we really try to hit on a lot, is the fact that you have to look at it as, what can I do to fix this? And how can I help other people apply these same technologies? And here's the trick, right? Unless someone uses these technologies very regularly and has, at this point, 11 months of experience dealing with it, there's not really going to be much difference between using it and hiring someone to do it.
Yeah.
Because when I did that chat with ChatGPT a few months back in SEO Happy Hour, I said, are you going to replace human writers? Are you able to create this stuff on your own? And the answer we got was a resounding no. Yeah. It can come up with something, but if I were to ask it, how do you improve a route from San Antonio to Austin? There were times that said, take a different route. There were times that said speed. And we all know that those are not ideal solutions. And if you live down here, you know, taking a different route doesn't always work because, let's just say, bridges down here are not necessarily built to accommodate the height of a Freightliner.
Ooh.
So you have to lead yourself and you have to lead your team to look beyond those unknown factors and how you can really kind of embrace the future of uncertainty. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about leading yourself and others to the possibilities beyond the unknown. I invite you all to join us again next week at 11:30 a.m. to have this discussion once more, dig further into the supply chain, and maybe next week we'll talk a bit about ocean imports because there's been some interesting things happening around the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach.
Oh, yeah.
So comment below if you have any specific questions, or you can DM me at myself or Kevin. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.